What price highways and how to get the money? The commission has a suggestion. Along those lines, so to speak, how much and who should pay? Two Arkansas corporate giants in the news, both in the billions, and how tight a wire walks a senator from Arkansas. Arkansas Week is next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. If 135 ladies and gentlemen of the Arkansas General Assembly and one governor can't produce a highway program, well, 5 guys say maybe we can. And that's where we'll begin tonight. Michael Hiblin joins us from KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas. Lance Turner, reporter and editor at Arkansas Business. Steve Bronner, an independent journalist. And thanks to everybody for coming in. Steve, we know that the Highway Commission will produce a plan. We just don't know what it is, and it's not altogether certain that the commission knows what it is.
Not at this point, and this would go in concert with the Good Roads Foundations and others who are out there trying to come up with a way to raise money for highways. The Highway Commission voted this week to pursue a plan to raise up to $400 million annually for highways. That would be a big ask. If you do it through the fuel tax, you have to double our current fuel tax, more than double it. It's about 21 cents now. It'll have to go up to, it's 21.5 cents now. It'll have to go up to 28. You have to add 28 cents a gallon to get to $400 million. The legislature has tried and really not even come close. In fact, someone say not tried very hard to come up with the money to try to increase funding for highways. Representative Dan Douglas of Bentonville has been really the primary supporter of this. He's gotten nowhere with a couple of different efforts over the past 2 sessions. So legislators are still meeting to try to come up with some way of funding highways informally. Those meetings are occurring informally, and they would have to work with a task force that's trying to figure out ways to do tax reform. But so far, there's no plan by anyone to raise money for highways at the moment.
Well, you called it and it is a big ask, increase in motor fuels taxes, gas and diesel, that would be required to fund that $400 million target. The commission and the highway establishment anyway would say, yeah, but we've got big needs. I mean, we're just crumbling.
Right. Well, highways have basically, funding's been flat now for a long time. In Arkansas, they haven't been raised since 2001. Federally, they haven't been raised since 1993. Meanwhile, the cost of construction and maintenance of highways has increased, and cars have become more fuel efficient, which means we are paying less in fuel taxes to drive on the same roads that are more expensive to fix. So efforts have been made to try to raise money. The fuel tax is the simplest way to do it, but polls have shown that Arkansans don't like fuel taxes. If they're going to, but other ways of doing it, such as using other types of highway-related expenditures, such as new and used cars and tires and that kind of thing, that's gotten nowhere. So how they'll come up with the money, it remains to be seen. But right now, the top line is $400 million a year.
Well, we're still stuck with. We've elected to continue the excise tax route on motor fuels, the per gallon tax, as opposed to a sales tax. Steve, is there any indication, all this polling, any indication that needle can be moved any?
Well, I haven't seen a poll in a while, and the most recent poll I saw by the Good Roads Foundation made it clear that a fuel tax, Arkansans would vote for very, very, I think the highest it was like 3 to 5 cents tops was where it stopped. After that, it plummeted down to virtually zero. So to get to 400 million would require a lot, not virtually zero, but very, very close to it. It was like in the single digits. So I don't know. There are other ways. Douglas's bill this past session would have removed the exemption at the wholesale level. That might be a way. In 2012, Arkansans voted for a half-cent sales tax for highways and exempted gasoline. And the way that we've always funded highways is by gasoline and diesel because it's a user fee. I drive on the road, therefore I pay for the gas. That fixes the road. So how we're going to do it next time, again, is an open question.
Well, and again, as you mentioned, it seems every 2 years there's an attempt anyway to go into general revenues for, quote, highway-related or vehicle-related expenditure, windshield wipe, batteries, tires, and the general revenue agencies always explode. Right,
that runs into every single state priority and
schools,
interest groups
DHS,
out there.
prisons, yeah.
Everybody, they all are against it, and it has, so far it's gotten nowhere.
Yeah.
Still a lot to be determined here. They don't know whether or not this would be an initiated act or a constitutional amendment, but they've laid out a timeline. They want to decide on some details by October, submit ballot language to the Attorney General by January, and then begin collecting signatures, have those together by July of next year. But clearly this is a problem, an ongoing issue, and lawmakers this year weren't willing to pass this on to voters and now pursuing this route. What the lawmakers were considering would have been a 20-year bond item, and that was more in the range of $200 million. But the officials hope to get a better idea of really what they want this to include here in the coming months.
Well, to Lance, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, legislators were never really all that excited about talking about highways even before the special session began, when people were asking, could this be a possibility that you would do something? And everybody was sort of keeping it at arm's length. And it's because no one ever wants to raise any taxes in Arkansas anymore on anything ever. And that's been the mantra of the Republican Party. Is that, in fact, we need to cut taxes and reform the tax code. And, of course, all of this highway stuff is very much going to play into what we'll talk about later in terms of the task force efforts to reform the tax code. You're just bumping up against a sentiment that's been sort of hardened over the last, decade at least, even longer, that any new tax increase is a bad tax increase. We couldn't even raise taxes on online sales this session. And so that's... You're bumping up against you have an immovable force against how do you say that? The
irresistible object.
The irresistible object or whatever. Yeah, you've got that kind of a situation going on.
And meanwhile, while you can't raise taxes, there's not a lot that you can cut in spending elsewhere because the courts stop you whenever you want to cut spending on K-12. Higher education funding has been flat for decades. Prisons, we're still putting people in jail. Healthcare is increasing. Partly because of Arkansas's programs and partly because of forces that the state government cannot possibly control. So there's not a lot to cut in spending, it's going to be hard to cut in spending. You could cut things, but it's very difficult. Hard to raise taxes. As long as we're on the roads, they seem to be fine. They'll be fine for a while until they're not, until the bridge collapses. But it's not collapsed yet, so it's just something that can be easily put off.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, where plainly, as Lance noted, the operative ethos in state government now is contraction rather than any kind of expansion. So the dynamic's kind of interesting in that you've got substantial parts of the business community anyway begging for particularly the shipping, those involved in shipping, begging for a highway program, and yet there's just no broad public support for it at all. And usually business, has a pretty profound voice at the Capitol. Not this time.
Not this time. And of course, the trucking association here in the state, they want a particular kind of tax increase. They would like to raise a tax on motor fuels. Other kinds, they would probably not be amenable to. But very much so, yeah. Business looks at the bottom line and knows what's good for them. But so do voters, and voters don't want to pay more taxes, and that's where the conflict is.
Worth noting, too, that this filters down because some of the highway revenue makes its way to cities and counties. And I don't know of surely there is one, but there's a city or a community in Arkansas that is proud of its streets. I just don't know which one it is.
Yeah, if you raise taxes at the state level for highways, only 70% goes to highways. The other 15% goes to cities, and another 15% goes to counties. So that also makes it more difficult for people who are trying to raise funding for what is the 12th largest highway system in the country.
And it gets that big, or it has gotten that big anyway, because of mayors and county judges particularly persuading their local legislature, hey, that county road over there, that needs to go into the state system.
Yep.
Right.
And not much. Okay, we've got another commission at work, and it met, I think, for the second time this past week, Michael. And the job is so complex, as it turns out, it's going to need a consultant.
Yeah. The what is it called? This tax reform committee looking into this has decided to bring on a private consultant. That the Bureau of Legislative Research wasn't enough for the amount of research that needs to be done. The Lieutenant Governor, Tim Griffin, sent a letter to each member saying that he wants recommendations for tax reform and relief, simplifying the tax code, lowering the tax burden, and in his words, rethinking and modernizing state government to reduce the need for tax revenue. But how you do that, that's the big question.
Well, it's interesting as well. I thought the money quote from the meeting, at least I wasn't there, but I read the money quote to me, no pun intended, was from the chairman or the vice chairman. He said, there's so many exemptions in the state tax code, we don't even know we can't identify them all. We need help.
Yeah, the job was too big for state workers to handle, and so that's why they need this person to come in and work. And I think it looked to me like it also sort of, this timeline for recommendations, which was already kind of tight. They're supposed to have some stuff by the end of the year to get ready for the next session. I would think that this sort of shortens that timeline a bit, but if you're going to allow time to hire a consultant first, which may not happen until August now, I believe how it works, and then you've got to go through all the numbers, and that was a point that Jim Hendren made, who's one of the leaders of this commission, is that it's nice to know in broad strokes what we want, but let's do the work of assessing what we have first and let that assessment inform what our recommendations will be. And it is going to be, I don't think anyone thought this would be an easy thing. I hope not, because everybody knows that everybody's going to have their own pet exemption. Every lobbyist in the state's got companies and people and special interests who, that's my exemption. Take care of my exemption, make sure it remains an exemption, and you're going to have dozens or scores of people, trying to fight for their thing. And so it puts legislators in their typical position of having to placate and deal with all these special interests, but also try to deliver on some kind of promise of reform.
Well, it would seem likely that we will not, the commission will not recommend anything that would substantially increase revenues.
No, that seems very likely.
No.
The goal is to create tax reform in order to lower taxes. That is the ultimate goal, is lower taxes.
And from there, we would have legislation presumably offered in February, I guess.
Of 2000, well, it would be in the 19th session, wouldn't it? I mean, aren't they waiting for
I think so.
Yeah.
Because you've got an off-year session coming up, right?
Yeah, we've got fiscal session. We've got billions involved in two corporate giants that are worthy of note. And Walmart, which had its annual celebration in Northwest Arkansas this past week. Lance?
Yeah, so this is the big event, the big shareholders meeting, and everyone goes to the Hill in Fayetteville at Bud Walton Arena. Thousands of Walmart employees from all over the globe get together, and it comes at an interesting time for Walmart, as we've sort of said before on this program. It's interesting times in retail in general. Just this week, in fact, Sears, which owns Sears and also Kmart, announced another round of store closings on top of other store closings that have already occurred. Retail is in an interesting spot because of the dominance or the growing dominance, the growth of online retail. And so Walmart, I think, had a lot to show off and a lot to say this year. You saw a lot of Mark Lowry, who is their new e-commerce guru, who they sort of acquired through the Jet.com purchase last year, a big purchase of an online retailer that Walmart made. Walmart is trying to, continue to boost its brick and mortar physical stores, but also its online business, which is growing and growing faster than it has been, but really sort of pales in comparison to the Amazon's efforts in the online space. And online is really where people are expecting the most growth. What's been interesting this week is every week you can find a story about Walmart and Amazon sort of going back and forth in this long-running battle that they're going to have. Amazon, with its Prime membership, that's what you pay. You pay a fee every month to get free shipping of products to your home, and a bunch of other services as well that Amazon bundles into it: movies, television shows, music streaming, online storage. Pretty compelling package for $100 a year. Amazon is lowering the monthly fee for that service for people who are on food stamps, for people who are on government support. So Amazon, having saturated the top end of the market for its Prime service, is now going to the lower end of the market. And lower end shoppers are Walmart's bread and butter in a lot of ways. A lot of people come to Walmart who are low income and who pay with food stamps. And so this was seen as another shot across the bow to try to attract those Walmart customers, get them into the Amazon ecosystem, and get them to spend fewer dollars with Walmart.
This thing just keeps moving. Retail just keeps moving steadily away from big box and from fixed location.
Right. And it's going to have a lot of repercussions across all areas of the economy. The workforce, number one. There are an awful lot of people who work for retailers, who work for brick and mortar stores. When those jobs go away, what are they going to do? Also, commercial real estate. You've got big investments in commercial real estate across the country. You've got retirement systems and pension systems that are invested in these collections, these REITs, these collections of commercial real estate as well. So there's a lot riding on the retail industry, and so it's going to be a painful era coming up as everything sort of adjusts to more online spending and less spending in physical stores. I don't think there's a lot of people who think that going to brick and mortar stores is going to go away completely, but it's certainly going to be less of a thing than it has been historically.
You mentioned it just a moment ago, the fading, well, even of a piece of retail Americana, and that is Sears, whose own CEO or CFO, maybe, I'm not sure, had told the street that there is some significant possibility that this company simply cannot continue, and that is Sears/Kmart now. Once upon a time, you could not drive anywhere in Arkansas. I mean, if it had a stoplight, it had a Sears.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's how fast things can change. And I read a piece this week that sort of talked about Sears, the first Sears catalog in 1888 or something like that, and how people, Sears was in the mail order game long before Amazon ever was, and why didn't Sears see that coming? Could Sears have been the Amazon of today? And it just goes to show you that you have a certain business model that you become wedded to, and it becomes your thing to the exclusion of all others. And if you don't innovate yourself, somebody else is going to come along and innovate for you. And that's what appears to have happened with Sears, and it's what's happened to a lot of people in this economy as the internet has just upended everything.
Yeah. Or even you mentioned Kmart, the announcement this week that they're going to close their last store in Little Rock,
right,
that it's completely going away from this market.
Okay, on to protein now, and that's Tyson. $4 billion it's just swallowed.
Yeah, this is Tyson's biggest deal since its purchase of Hillshire just a few years ago. Tyson officially completed its purchase of Advanced Pierre Holdings, which is a value-added food products company based out of Ohio. Got that deal done, and a lot of people see this as a big boost for Tyson. What we've noted before is that the margins in the meat processing part of what Tyson does, beef, chicken, poultry, there's another beef, chicken, and another one. Pork, there you go. That's the big three. Those margins are only what they are, and you can't get much more out of them. But with value-added products, of course, packaged foods, foods that you bring a lot to the table with in terms of the additives and the ingredients and breakfast sandwiches and all these different sort of concept foods.
Nukable foods.
Nukable foods, that's right. Yeah, stuff you can quickly prepare, quick prepared meals. Those margins are much more generous to you as a company. And so that is a big part of Tyson's strategy going forwards, and Advanced Pierre is a big piece of that.
Okay, some national, but with a local twist. The gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Senator Cotton, was, of course, a member of the panel, which heard testimony on Thursday from the former director of the FBI. Steve?
Yes, James Comey, as everybody knows, testified yesterday in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee about his firing. He did not pull any punches against the president. Said he was taking notes because he was convinced that President Trump would lie about what was going to happen, or at least he was suspected it. Senator Cotton was on the committee and asked some tough questions, but it was not on an adversarial tone. It was I had anticipated that the questions from both sides would be very partisan. They were not, and Senator Cotton's were not. He did get James Comey to say that a New York Times article from February that said that the Trump campaign had colluded with Russia was pretty much false. So that was a feather in Senator Cotton's cap. It capped off an interesting week for Senator Cotton. He dined with the president on Tuesday, 2 days before Comey had his presentation.
Tyson steaks, maybe, or
Sure.
what?
Yeah.
Possibly, probably not.
Chops or what?
Probably not.
Very well done steaks.
Probably
too.
not microwaved.
Right.
But not Trump steaks. But supposedly the topics were foreign policy. Also, an interesting story about Senator Cotton in the New York Times about his growing influence in the Trump administration. That he has a big role in kind of shaping President Trump's policies. A strong suggestion that the National Security Advisor McMaster came from Cotton, and so they are. It appears that Senator Cotton is a congressional ally of President Trump.
Which would seem to pose maybe a bit of a balancing act on Mr. Cotton's part. While any senator would or member of Congress would want influence and be happy to be known as having influence in the White House, Mr. Trump's administration has troubles, obviously. So it would seem that Mr. Cotton would like to be close, but not too close.
Well, he had his own presidential ambitions. He was visiting Iowa in anticipation, one would think, of running for president in 2020, and those plans apparently would be derailed, although he's still talking to Iowans right now. So,
well, he's what, 41 years old?
He's got plenty of time. But President Trump remains very popular in Arkansas, according to the latest polls. So, and it's been a little while since we've seen one, but presumably he's still popular. So, Senator Cotton would not be hurt by being an ally of the president.
Certainly not at home.
Not at home. Yeah. And moreover, he mentioned that he and President Trump have some common beliefs about immigration, particularly. Senator Cotton has been pretty tough on immigration lately, even on unskilled labor particularly. So it doesn't hurt him politically to be seen as an ally of President Trump. And he's also been willing to be reasonably critical, although very, very carefully.
Softly, gently critical, yeah. Mm-hmm. Gentlemen?
It was indeed fascinating. I mean, one of the biggest anticipated, events like this. I mean, the first time in years I've seen all local TV stations, cut into programming, not just leaving it up to the cable networks. But you did get some criticism about the dinner with Trump on Tuesday. Michael John Gray, the head of the Democratic Party of Arkansas, suggested that maybe Trump and Cotton were talking about questions Cotton could ask. But no, the reports were that was not one of the topics that they discussed over dinner. But still fascinating to watch. But I think Senator Cotton keeping his options open, still having interest in Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lance?
Well, I think Cotton's got some I think what Cotton can say is that, he's working with Trump working with him on policy, which maybe hasn't been a strong suit of Trump's in terms of, trying to translate the things that Trump says and does into a coherent thing, and one that would probably play to Cotton's benefits on issues like immigration and probably trade issues as well. And so I think that could be viewed as strategically a good thing for everybody, and not necessarily wedding him as a Trump supporter. And so Cotton has played it very interestingly this entire, in the campaign and now as president. I think he's played it just about as well as anybody probably could.
It should be noted, we're talking about ambitions and Cotton's political future, but we're governing right now, and Senator Cotton he has a belief system that he wants the country to go in a certain direction, and
he got elected.
Right. So you work with the president and you try to move him in the direction that you want it to go. So while we can talk about 2020, and I'm the one who brought it up, there also is the issue of just look, this is 2017, and President Trump is the president of the United States, and Senator Cotton has influence, and he's going to try to use it.
Guys, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. We will see you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.